Everyone told him she would shatter. They said that when Alpha King Robert finally cast aside his devoted queen for a strategic marriage, Linda would crumble before the court, weep, and beg to remain by his side in any capacity, even as a forgotten concubine in the shadows. It was tradition, wasn't it? A public rejection from an Alpha King is supposed to be a complete annihilation of the soul. Robert believed it too. He braced himself for her pleading. He prepared for the inevitable scene of desperation. But when he delivered the announcement that severed their 5-year bond in front of the entire supernatural aristocracy, he didn't hear a single gasp of anguish. He saw a smile. A chilling, regal, utterly controlled smile that carried no warmth, no trembling, no surrender. She rose from her throne as if she'd been waiting for this moment, removed her crown with deliberate grace, placed it on the armrest like discarded jewelry, and wished him joy in his new union before walking out, with her head held impossibly high. And by the time he realized what that smile meant, by the time he understood the meticulous calculation behind those calm green eyes, the queen's chambers were empty. Her scent had vanished from the castle corridors, and the Alpha King was left ruling a kingdom that suddenly felt hollow. This is the story of the king who thought he held all the power, only to discover he'd been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. Chapter 1, the Grand Harvest Festival, was always the perfect cover for chaos. While the castle grounds blazed with torchlight and echoed with the roar of celebration, while Robert danced with his new bride-to-be beneath a canopy of autumn leaves, Linda moved through the servant corridors like a shadow no one would remember. She had spent 6 months building this exit strategy, one careful conversation at a time. The young scullery maid who owed her a debt after Linda had hidden her pregnancy from the head cook. The stable master whose son she'd saved from exile after a petty theft. The scholar who'd taught her languages in secret and believed a woman's mind was wasted on courtly pleasantries. Each one had been chosen not for their station, but for their discretion and their quiet resentment of a king who treated loyalty like currency to be spent and forgotten. The maid brought her plain traveling clothes, rough wool instead of silk, a hooded cloak that smelled of horse and hay. The stable master had a mount waiting at the eastern gate, the one that opened onto the forest road, the one that would be unmanned during the festival's peak revelry. The scholar handed her documents bearing a new name, a fabricated history, letters of introduction to contacts in the Highland territories who asked no questions if the gold was good. Linda changed in a storage room that smelled of dried herbs and old leather. She left her gowns folded on the bed, her jewels arranged in neat rows on the vanity, her crown sitting on the pillow, like a corpse. Everything she was supposed to be, laid out for burial. She kept only what fit in a single saddlebag, gold coins sewn into the lining, the documents, a silver dagger that had belonged to her mother, and one book of poetry Robert had never known she owned. By the time the festival reached its crescendo, by the time Robert finally thought to send someone to check on his discarded queen, Linda was already 20 miles into the forest. The rain started an hour later, washing away the hoofprints, turning the road into a river of mud that swallowed all evidence of her passage. They would search, of course. They would send riders and scouts and tracking hounds. But they would be looking for a broken queen fleeing in panic, not a woman who'd been planning her resurrection for half a year. And they would be far, far too late. Chapter 2. Robert didn't sleep for 3 days. He sent 50 men into the forest, another 20 along the river routes, and a dozen more to patrol the borders of neighboring territories. They found nothing. No tracks, no witnesses, no trace of a woman who had lived in his castle for 5 years and should have been impossible to miss. The rain had been thorough. Where her horse might have left prints, there was only churned mud. Where her scent might have lingered, there was only the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. His best tracker, a wolf with a nose that could follow a trail 3 weeks old, stood at the eastern gate and simply shook his head. It was as if she had evaporated into mist. Morgana tried to soothe him with practiced touches and political platitudes. The council reminded him that alliances required focus, that a king couldn't afford to be distracted by sentiment. But Robert couldn't stop seeing that smile, couldn't stop feeling the wrongness of it, the way it had sliced through his certainty and left him bleeding in ways he didn't understand. On the fourth day, a farmer's boy came to the castle gates with a green silk ribbon in his trembling hands. He'd found it caught on branches by the river, he said, near the bend where the current ran fastest and deepest. Robert rode there himself, stood on the muddy bank, and stared at the dark water that gave nothing back. They dragged the river for 2 days. They found nothing. The council convened in hushed voices. A tragedy, they agreed. A queen overcome with grief had wandered into the storm and been claimed by the waters. It was sad, certainly, but these things happened. The kingdom required closure. The people required a narrative they could mourn. So Robert ordered a coffin carved from white oak and lined with blue velvet. He filled it with her abandoned gowns, the jewels she'd left behind, a portrait someone had painted of her years ago when she'd still looked at him with something like hope. He held a funeral with full royal honors, watched them lower the empty box into the family crypt, and listened to the priest speak beautiful lies about a queen who had loved her king until her final breath. He never told anyone that he'd planted the ribbon himself, that he'd needed a reason to stop searching, that the alternative, that she had planned this, that she had wanted to disappear, was somehow worse than death. Chapter 3. 3 years changed everything and nothing at all. Lady Elaine Ashford arrived at negotiations the way winter arrived in the mountains, inevitable, unforgiving, and impossible to ignore. She had brokered the Silver Pine Accord that ended a century-old blood feud between rival pacts. She had negotiated trade routes that made poor territories rich and humbled arrogant alphas who thought their strength was enough. She wore emerald green-like armor and spoke 4 languages with the precision of a blade, finding gaps between ribs. No one knew where she had come from. The story changed depending on who told it. A merchant's daughter from the coast, a scholar's widow fleeing scandal, a minor noble's bastard, with nothing to lose and everything to prove. She had appeared in the Highland territories with gold and documents and a mind sharp enough to cut through centuries of tradition, like it was nothing more than morning fog. The Highland Council had tested her once, early on, with an impossible case. 2 alphas ready to go to war over a border dispute that had no clean solution. She had walked into that room and walked out 6 hours later with a treaty that gave both sides what they needed and neither side what they wanted, which was the mark of true compromise. After that, her reputation became currency. Now kings and alphas came to her. Now she set the terms. Robert heard her name for the first time during an emergency council meeting, spoken by an advisor who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. The kingdom was fracturing. Morgana's family had promised loyalty, but delivered treachery. They were rallying smaller packs in the north, spreading whispers that Robert was weak, that his heir was sickly, that perhaps the throne needed stronger hands. Skirmishes had become battles. Battles threatened to become war. They needed someone who understood supernatural politics, someone neutral enough that both sides might listen, someone with a reputation for solving the unsolvable. They needed Lady Elaine Ashford. Robert stared at the letter his advisor placed before him, an introduction from the Highland Council, a list of her credentials, terms for consultation that were expensive enough to make him wince. At the bottom, in elegant script, was her seal, a phoenix rising from ashes. He had no idea that the woman who had become a legend had once worn his crown. He had no idea that she had been watching his kingdom crumble from 300 miles away and waiting to see if he would be desperate enough to ask for help. He signed the letter and sent it north that same day. Chapter 4. The Highland territories were nothing like Robert's kingdom. Where his castle stood as a monument to power and legacy, the Highland Council operated from a fortress built into the mountainside. All stone and practicality, designed for survival rather than spectacle. Everything here felt sharper, colder, stripped of the comfortable lies that cushioned royal life. Lady Ashford's assistant met him in the entrance hall, a severe woman with silver hair who looked at his royal regalia like it was a costume she found mildly amusing. She led him through corridors lined with maps and treaties instead of portraits, past rooms where negotiations happened in multiple languages simultaneously, upstairs that seemed designed to remind visiting dignitaries that they were supplicants here, not sovereigns. The office door was already open when they arrived. She stood with her back to him, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the mountain range like a painting. She wore deep emerald green. The color struck him immediately, though he couldn't say why. Her dark hair was pinned in an elaborate style that seemed both elegant and severe, and when she turned to face him, Robert felt something in his chest constrict. Those eyes, green and piercing and utterly unreadable. "Your Majesty." Her voice was smooth, controlled, with an accent he couldn't quite place. "Please, sit." Robert remained standing. His wolf was restless, pacing inside his mind, sniffing at something it couldn't identify. She smelled of mountain air and ink and something else, something underneath that made his instincts scream recognition, even as his rational mind found nothing familiar in her features. "Lady Ashford, I appreciate you agreeing to meet. Your kingdom is on the verge of civil war. Of course I agreed to meet." She moved to her desk with fluid grace, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Your letter mentioned Morgana Blackthorn's family is rallying the northern packs against you. Tell me, do you believe this is about political ideology, or is this personal?" The question was direct, almost brutal. Robert lowered himself into the chair, feeling off balance in a way he hadn't experienced in years. She watched him with the patient intensity of a scholar examining a specimen, and there was something in the slight tilt of her head, the way she held herself with perfect posture, that made his pulse quicken. "Lady Ashford, have we met before?" Her smile was polite and utterly cold. "I don't believe so, Your Majesty. I would certainly remember meeting an Alpha King." But her eyes said something entirely different. Her eyes said, "You have no idea who you're looking at, and that's exactly how I want it." Chapter 5. Robert returned to the Highland Fortress after midnight without permission or announcement. He'd spent 3 days watching Lady Ashford dissect his kingdom's political structure with surgical precision. 3 days of that voice sliding under his skin. 3 days of his wolf clawing at his consciousness, insisting something was wrong, something was familiar, something was her. He found her private study on the 3rd floor, light still glowing beneath the door. He didn't knock. She looked up from her desk without surprise, as if she'd been expecting this exact confrontation at this exact hour. A single candle burned beside her, casting shadows across papers covered in her precise handwriting. Linda. The name hung in the air between them like a blade. She set down her pen with deliberate care. "That name belongs to a dead woman, Your Majesty. I buried her 3 years ago in an empty coffin. I believe you were there." Robert closed the door behind him, his hands shaking. "The scent. I knew there was something. Suppressants," she said calmly. "Quite effective, though they require discipline to maintain. I've had 3 years to perfect discipline." She stood, and in the candlelight, he could see her fully now. The face he'd mourned, the eyes that had haunted him, the woman who'd smiled at him like ice before vanishing into a storm. "You wanted Lady Ashford's help. You have it. What I was before is irrelevant." Irrelevant? He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of her desk. "You let me believe you were dead. I searched for weeks. You held a funeral and married Morgana 6 months later." "Yes, I heard. Very moving, I'm sure." Her voice carried no heat, no anger, just the flat recitation of facts. "You wanted a political alliance. You got one. I wanted freedom. I took it. We both made choices, Robert. I never wanted you dead." "No," she agreed quietly. "You wanted me compliant. You wanted me grateful. You wanted me to disappear quietly into whatever shadow you designated for discarded queens. I simply chose which shadow to disappear into." She met his eyes with that terrible calm. "The woman you rejected doesn't exist anymore. She drowned in that river the night you chose power over her. What remains is Lady Elaine Ashford, and she has work to do. Your kingdom is collapsing, and I'm the only one qualified to save it. Why would you save it? Why would you help me?" Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Because this time, you'll owe me everything." Chapter 6. The Highland Council Chamber was designed for exactly this kind of theater. Circular, with tiered seating that forced everyone to face the center, it turned negotiation into spectacle, and diplomacy into bloodsport. Linda stood at the center like a conductor preparing an orchestra, her emerald gown a calculated choice that made her impossible to ignore. Robert sat in the observation gallery with the other petitioners, watching her command a room full of alphas and territorial leaders who would have eaten her alive 3 years ago. Now they leaned forward when she spoke, their aggression tempered by the knowledge that she held information they needed and alliances they couldn't afford to lose. Lord Garrett, your Northern Border Patrol has increased by 40% in the last 6 months. Hurry. Voice carried through the chamber without effort. Yet your official reports claim no threat assessment justifies this expansion. Curious. Garrett, an alpha twice her size with a reputation for crushing opposition, shifted in his seat. Precautionary measures. Precautionary? Linda smiled, and Robert recognized that expression, the one that meant she was 3 moves ahead and enjoying the game. Is that what you call secret meetings with Morgana Blackthorn's uncle? The ones held in your hunting lodge every 3rd Tuesday? The room went silent. She moved to a large map spread across the center table, her fingers tracing territorial lines with practiced ease. Lord Garrett has been promised the Eastern Valleys in exchange for military support when the Blackthorns make their move against the crown. Lady Syrah, she turned to a sharp-faced woman who'd been quiet until now. You've been funneling weapons through your southern ports, using merchant vessels that don't exist on any official registry. And Lord Thorne, your sudden willingness to host Blackthorn family members despite your public neutrality is remarkably convenient. Robert watched her dismantle 3 territorial powers in under 5 minutes. She produced documents, shipping manifests, intercepted correspondence, witness testimonies from servants who'd been invisible until she'd made them matter. Every accusation was backed by evidence so thorough it left no room for denial. Here's what will happen, Linda continued, her voice cutting through the rising protests. You will withdraw your support from the Blackthorn conspiracy. You will provide written testimony of their plans. And you will submit to Highland Council oversight for the next 2 years. She paused, letting the weight settle. Or I will take this evidence to the Continental Assembly, and your territories will be sanctioned into economic collapse by summer. One by one, they capitulated. Robert had ruled through strength and lineage. Linda ruled through information and precision, and watching her work was like watching someone rewrite the rules of power itself. Chapter 7. Prince Edmund arrived at the Highland Fortress with his governess and 2 guards Robert trusted with his life. The boy was 7 years old, small for his age, with his father's dark hair and a quiet intelligence that reminded Linda painfully of the child she and Robert had once discussed having. That future felt like it belonged to someone else now, a different woman in a different life. She was reviewing territorial agreements when the screaming started. Linda reached the guest quarters ahead of the guards, her instincts overriding protocol. Edmund lay on the floor convulsing, his skin pale and slick with sweat. His eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. The governess was hysterical, and Robert knelt beside his son with the helpless terror of a man whose power meant nothing against this. Move! Linda dropped to her knees, her fingers finding the pulse point at Edmund's throat. Rapid and thready. His lips were turning blue. What's happening to him? Robert's voice broke on the question. Linda didn't answer. She was cataloging symptoms with the clinical detachment she'd learned from the Highland healers. The convulsions, the respiratory distress. The way Edmund's wolf was trying to surface and failing, trapped beneath something that shouldn't be in his system. She pulled back his eyelid, checking pupil response, then bent close to smell his breath. There, faint but unmistakable. Bitter almonds underneath the scent of fear. Wolfsbane. She looked at the governess. What has he eaten in the last 6 hours? Nothing unusual. Breakfast at the inn, water from his canteen. The canteen. Where is it? One of the guards produced it, hands shaking. Linda uncapped it and inhaled, then tipped a drop onto her palm. The liquid was clear, odorless to human senses, but her wolf recognized the corruption immediately. It's synthetic, she said, her mind racing. Refined to mask the scent and act slowly. He's been ingesting small doses for weeks, maybe months. She looked at Robert, and for the first time since he'd discovered her identity, she let him see past her armor. This wasn't an accident. Someone has been poisoning your air systematically, waiting for the accumulation to reach critical mass. Morgana. Robert's voice turned to gravel. She's had access to him, to his household. Not just access, planning. Linda was already moving, barking orders to the Highland healers who'd appeared in the doorway. We have maybe an hour before the toxin reaches his heart. Get me activated charcoal, milk thistle extract, and someone who knows blood purification rituals. She met Robert's eyes across his son's dying body. I can save him, but then we end this. Chapter 8. Robert returned to his kingdom with Linda's evidence in a leather satchel, and her testimony sealed in documents that would stand before any supernatural court. Edmund was alive, recovering in the Highland fortress under the care of healers who asked no questions and accepted no bribes. Linda had given Robert everything he needed to dismantle the conspiracy. She had not returned with him. The throne room was packed. Robert had called an emergency session of the Grand Council, and the Blackthorne family sat in the places of honor they'd occupied for nearly 3 years. Morgana in the Queen's chair, with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. That confidence died the moment Robert threw the first document onto the council table. Shipping manifests from Lord Garrett's ports, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Weapons and silver ammunition, ordered by the Blackthorne family and distributed to northern packs preparing for insurrection. He added another document, testimonies from servants in Edmund's household, detailing how synthetic wolfsbane was added to his water supply. Over a period of 4 months, Morgana's face went white. Her father, Duke Alaric Blackthorne, rose from his seat with manufactured outrage. This is slander! You have no proof! I have the canteen. Robert nodded, and a guard brought forth the evidence, sealed in glass. Tested by Highland Council healers, and confirmed to contain a wolfsbane derivative designed to kill slowly without detection. The same substance was found in my son's blood. The council chamber erupted. Alphas who had pledged loyalty to the Blackthorns suddenly found reasons to edge away from them. Political allies discovered urgent business elsewhere. The architecture of the conspiracy collapsed in real time as Robert laid out 3 years of treachery. The secret meetings, the promised territories, the plan to murder Edmund and claim the throne through Morgana's eventual heir. You poisoned a child. Robert's voice was quiet now, which made it more terrifying. You plotted against the crown you swore to serve. You turned my kingdom into a battlefield for your ambition. Morgana stood, her beauty turned brittle with desperation. Robert, please. We can negotiate. The time for negotiation ended when you tried to murder my son. He gestured to the guards. The Blackthorne family is hereby stripped of all titles, lands, and holdings. You are exiled from this kingdom and all allied territories. You have until sunset to leave. If you are found within our borders after dark, the penalty is death. Duke Alaric lunged forward, but 6 guards were already moving. They dragged him backward, his protests dissolving into threats and finally into silence. Morgana met Robert's eyes one last time. You'll regret this. I already do, he said. I regret the day I ever trusted you. Chapter 9. Robert found her in the Highland Council library 3 days after the exile, surrounded by books on trade law and territorial reform. She didn't look up when he entered, though he knew she'd sensed him the moment he crossed the threshold. Edmund is asking for you, he said quietly. He calls you the lady who saved him. I'm glad he's recovering. She made a notation in the margin of her document, her pen moving with precise efficiency. The healers say he should make a full recovery within the month. Robert closed the distance between them, stopping at the edge of her desk. Come home with me. Now she looked up, and her expression was carefully neutral. That hasn't been my home for 3 years. It could be again. He placed a small velvet box on her desk, and even without opening it, she knew what it contained. Her crown, the one she'd left on the armrest like discarded jewelry. The council has annulled my marriage to Morgana. The throne needs a queen. Edmund needs... What Edmund needs is a father who doesn't trade people like political currency. Linda closed her book with a soft thud. What your kingdom needs is stability and reform, which I'm happy to consult on from here. What you're asking for is absolution, Robert, and I'm not in the business of granting that. Then what do you want? The question came out raw, stripped of royal composure. Tell me how to fix this. Linda stood, moving to the window that overlooked the mountain range. The sunset painted everything in shades of gold and crimson, and she was quiet for so long, Robert thought she might not answer at all. I want you to understand what you threw away, she finally said. I want you to see me as something other than an ornament for your throne, or a solution to your current crisis. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw something other than ice in her expression. Something almost like possibility. If you want me in your life, you don't get to summon me back to your world and expect me to fall in line. You come to mine. You learn what I've built. You prove that you can see me as an equal, not a subject. You're asking me to court you. I'm asking you to earn me. Her smile was slight but genuine. The woman you rejected is dead, Robert. If you want to know the woman she became, you're going to have to work